Episode 8 of Shogun is here, as we move deeper into uncharted territory, going places the story in both the original novel and real history did not go. How does it work out? Let us dive in and discuss. And as always, there will be spoilers ahead. Episode 8 is titled Abyss of Life. In the review for the previous episode, I mentioned how we had reached the point where I had no clue where this show was heading, and that it was something which actually made me excited to see where it went. Well, after this episode, I have to say, personally, I'm a bit more worried. I don't know what I was expecting for this episode, but this one did really feel like it was stuck in the mud, which there was a lot of. Yet, let's go in order here and talk through most of the major story beats. So the episode starts off with everyone coming back to Edo in the wake of Nagakato's death. Had Nagakato not died, then I imagine they would all be heading towards Osaka right now instead. But with Nagakato dead, they are allowed a brief mourning period of roughly a month and a half. On top of this, Toranaga is not doing good, looking increasingly depressed and sick. And were he not perhaps faking this illness, I would say it was likely because he was constantly out in the rain while in Anjiro throughout the prior few episodes. However, it is here in this intro scene that Blackthorn rides up to Toranaga to give his condolences, only to have Toranaga look at him with disdain before riding off. Following this, Blackthorn is given his rudders back by Mariko, who tells him that he has officially been released from Toranaga's service and that if he wants, he can just leave Japan after everything is all done. This is obviously another massive departure from the book, but not one that I think is bad if they use it in an interesting way, which they sort of do later on in the episode. After this opening scene, we are brought back to Osaka, where Ishido is trying to court the Lady Ochiba into marrying him, something which would solidify their own alliance, along with further legitimizing Ishido himself. In the book, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was Toranaga's brother who was actually trying to get after Ochiba, but instead they are having Ishido take on that role here, which I think makes more sense given how they've set up the characters. As they keep reminding us, Ishido came from nothing. He was not born a samurai and had to claw his way to earn everything he has achieved, something which I think is quite admirable given his current position. However, others don't see it that way, and he is often looked down upon because of his humble origins, despite the fact that the Taiko also came from the lower classes as well. Ochiba, on the other hand, does not seem too thrilled about the idea of marrying Ishido, so we will see what she actually decides to do. Back in Edo, things are underway for Nagakato's funeral, which was fascinating to see. The topic of samurai funerals was actually discussed in the interview with the show's historical advisor as well. It was really interesting to see all the attention to detail shown here, especially if we were to compare it with the abysmal funeral scenes that were shown in Netflix's Age of Samurai. What is also interesting though is that it really does appear that Toranaga does not have any other sons in this series, or at least no other sons in Edo. But being that no other sons have been mentioned either, I'm inclined to believe that Nagakato was Toranaga's only son and heir. This once again strengthens the theory I stated previously, that if/when Toranaga wins, he might run into a massive succession crisis of his own at some point. Yet, moving on, I also want to touch on a really good comment made by Omi the night before. It was here, when most of Nagakato's friends were drinking to his memory, that they were discussing his actions and how he died, with Tora Hiromatsu essentially calling him reckless and foolish. And what I really like is when Omi spoke up, and said that even if Nagakato's actions were reckless, they were still done in complete defiance of Nobutatsu and in true service to Toranaga, something which should be completely respected and honored. From almost everything I have read regarding samurai, this is what seems like the most appropriate response a samurai would have likely thought at this time. Yes, Nagakato had acted rashly, but his intention was admirable, and his conviction absolute. Following the funeral, Father Alvito is back in Edo as well, to deliver the news that the Christian lords on the council could not be swayed. Toranaga does not completely trust Alvito though anymore, and has Mariko translate for him. I still really like this portrayal of Father Alvito here in the series. While in the 1980 adaptation and even in the book he seemed much more menacing, here he seems way more well-meaning and good-natured. He seems like a nice individual who is just trying to navigate the difficult situation he and the Catholic Church is in Japan. He is even kind to Blackthorn instead of being mean and condescending, only really poking at Blackthorn after Blackthorn pokes at him first. In the end, Toranaga still honors his previous deal with Alvito and is going to allow the Jesuits to construct a church in Edo. However, he is going to place it right next to the new pleasure district that we saw discussed in the previous episode, something which Alvito doesn't seem too happy about. I like that much of Edo still feels under construction. We see a lot of large plots of land that are still being developed, and even Edo Castle is still in the process of being built. We have to remember that Toranaga is still on the rise here, and his power base is not yet the mighty bastion that it would one day become as the capital of his powerful military government. As a side note, it is also interesting to see Edo under construction here, when also recently having been playing Rise of the Ronin and seeing Edo through the lens of the Bakumatsu period some 260 years later. After his meeting with Elvito, Toranaga tells him to go back to Osaka to tell the council of what he saw in Edo, how Toranaga appeared as defeated, ill, and most importantly, just wanting peace. Although it seems now that Tora Hiromatsu finally sees through things and relays this to the others, saying that if Toranaga was really about to surrender, he would not be sending Elvito back to Osaka to throw the council off into thinking that Toranaga was weak. And although I really like this little scene, there is a big scene that comes later that I think sort of ruins it. But we'll get to that. First off, we have to talk about the meeting between Mariko and her husband Buntaro. Now, in the book, this was something that was actually ordered by Toranaga, as he wanted Buntaro and Mariko to sort of make up and end the hostility between them. However, what I really like here is that the whole thing instead seems to be more of Buntaro's idea. The tea ceremony is presented beautifully, and I enjoy how much they gave proper time to appreciate it here, just like they did in the book as well. But of course, this scene does also diverge from the original story as well, with Buntaro saying that he is finally willing to let Mariko die if she wishes, and that he will die with her. This is because he does not believe that Toranaga is faking things, and that he truly does believe that Toranaga has been defeated. So why not end it all here? However, Mariko now refuses, despite the fact that it's the one thing she's always wanted, instead insisting that really she's always wanted a life away from Buntaro. She goes on to say that she would never die with him. This scene was honestly just sad all around. On one hand, it's sad that Mariko has had to endure such a tortured existence, first being married off against her will to someone she didn't love, then later having her whole family wiped out. But on the other hand, it's also really sad for Buntaro. Like I've repeatedly said in the past, it's clear that he does really love her, and it's because of the fact that she has repeatedly refused love back to him that his frustration has boiled over into him becoming an extremely abusive partner. They are both stuck in a situation they don't want to be in, and I think this is one of the most heartbreaking moments I've seen in the series so far, because now at what he thinks is the end of the line, he is willing to finally let Mariko die, which is something he does consider to be the ultimate act of love, by giving her the thing she's always asked for, only for her to now throw it all back in his face. To be honest, I think Buntaro has become one of my favorite characters in the show, because he really is someone who they have expanded the story of in meaningful ways. He is not just a cold-hearted, brutal warrior who has also displayed atrocious behavior to his wife, as he is depicted in the book and prior adaptation. Instead, he is himself also a tortured soul who has been deprived of the love that he has always wanted from his wife. And I think it's this fact that he has been deprived of love that has turned him into such a grim figure. I am very interested to see how his story here in this adaptation will end. Now, another meeting that is massively different is that between Blackthorn and his old crew of the Erasmus. In the book and prior adaptation, this reunification is somewhat of a joyous one, undercut by the fact that Blackthorn, after living many months in Japan, now views the customs of his former crew as disgusting. His crew in these prior versions had become pretty pathetic, but they still ended up serving a purpose later in the story. Here, however, Blackthorn only runs into one of his old crewmates, named Salomon, and although Blackthorn offers Salomon and the rest of the crew an opportunity to return home, Salomon is very angry at Blackthorn, blaming him for their misfortune and trying to accuse Blackthorn of simply trying to glory hunt, becoming the first Englishman to reach Japan. This all eventually erupts into a fight where Blackthorn beats Salomon into unconsciousness. With his old crew now off the table, Blackthorn has nowhere else to turn to now except to Yabu, who he sees as the only person with enough ambition to truly work towards achieving greater aims. Initially, Yabu refuses Blackthorn, and it's here that Blackthorn takes out his wakizashi and places it on the mat before him. Originally, I thought they might somehow squeeze in Blackthorn's attempted seppuku here from the book. But instead, Blackthorn explains how he feels no connection to anything or anyone in Japan, but that he also does not feel connected back to Europe at all either after his meeting with his crew. It is interesting to see Blackthorn say this. In the book, although he had sort of turned away from many European mindsets and lifestyle choices, he had come to replace a lot of these ideas with Japanese ones that he had come to respect. It's odd to see him here say that he feels no connection to anything, not Europe or Japan. and once again, I'm still interested to see where they end up taking his character. Eventually though, we come to the real climax of the episode, the meeting between Toranaga and all of his generals. This was by far one of the most intense scenes in the entire series so far, as Toranaga wishes to have each of his generals write out that they are going to surrender with him. However, many of his generals refuse. I also have to say, I love the look of these guys. The show continues to knock it out of the park in terms of both costume design and hairstyles. These look like the grizzled veteran commanders of the Sengoku Jidai. But, like I said, they all refuse to sign, and instead insist on fighting. Some of them perhaps even suspect that Toranaga is faking his defeated position and illness. The most significant of which being Tora Hiromatsu. In the book, Hiromatsu is constantly challenging the plans of Toranaga, and it isn't until they are in private that Toranaga finally reveals to Hiromatsu what his true intentions are, something which Hiromatsu, once he finally understands, greatly praises Toranaga for. Yet here, things go to the extreme, with Hiromatsu threatening to commit seppuku unless Toranaga changes course. Seppuku done in protest were real things that did happen in pre-modern Japan. They can be referred to as kanchi, with one of the more famous stories being that of Hirate Masahide, who ended his own life in hopes of forcing Oda Nobunaga to take a more serious role in leadership. Here in Shogun, I was initially expecting Toranaga to drop the ruse when Hiromatsu was threatening such an action. Yet Toranaga doesn't, and this surprisingly causes Hiromatsu to go through with it, committing seppuku right then and there in the audience chamber. I do not like this decision. At the time, this is made to seem like a very real thing that is happening, but in reality, later on it's implied that perhaps this was all planned out beforehand, when Toranaga explains that Hiromatsu knew his duty well. They need everyone, both allies and enemies, to believe that Toranaga is defeated in order for his plan to truly succeed. But then, why would Hiromatsu also earlier have told everyone that he believed Toranaga was faking it? The only explanation is that Hiromatsu and Toranaga must have had a meeting off-screen where he told him the truth. But this just seems lazy from a storytelling perspective. But far more importantly, why the hell would Toranaga sacrifice perhaps his greatest general and advisor? I get trying to make his defeat appear as real, but there had to be a better way to do things. Even anyone less significant could have easily been convinced to give their life for the greater purpose. But just to give away one of your best commanders like this is just crazy. And I know comparisons to real historical figures can sort of be made. With someone like Torimoto Tara, another lifelong friend and general of Tokugawa Ieyasu who gave his life to defend Fushimi Castle in the face of the Western Army. But that at least served a greater purpose of stalling their foes and allowing Ieyasu to focus his attention elsewhere. This seems like it was just added into this adaptation for the sake of hiking up the drama. Also, why did he commit seppuku right in the audience chamber like this? In most cases, in situations like this, the forecourt or another specific room would be utilized to carry out this act. Not to mention the fact that usually Hiromatsu would also have had to have written out a proper will and death poem, which yes, he could have just done off screen as well. Still, ruining the floor of the room by staining it with blood is not something you would necessarily see unless the seppuku was done in desperation, such as at the end of a battle or siege. The whole situation just felt really fast and forced for the sake of the story, not to mention gratuitous. Now, I don't have too much more to say about the episode, other than the fact that by the end, Yabu does agree to work with Blackthorn, as they plot to head off to Osaka. However, Toranaga, who has now clued Mariko into the plan, sends her with them as well. So now everyone is converging on Osaka for the grand finale. This episode was a lot. And to be honest, although the drama was good, when it comes down to the big important moments, I think I was left a bit dissatisfied. While before things might have felt like they were moving pretty fast, here they felt like they were stalling out. I would have rather the episode move the story a bit quicker because we are so close to the end now with only 2 episodes left and so much more to cover. And unfortunately, based on where the story is currently at, along with what the descriptions of the next 2 episodes are, I don't think we'll be getting the Battle of Sekigahara in the series. Or at least not a whole episode devoted to it. And once again, I know it's not really that big of a part in the book or in the prior adaptation, but it's still something I would have loved to see them do here to really cap things off. Now, of course I could be wrong, and I actually wish I am, but as I keep saying, we'll just have to wait and see. This series is going in so many bizarre directions now, both good, bad, and odd, and we can only guess where it's all going to end up. But that's not to say the drama, acting, and so much more has not been great. There is still plenty to love about the series. I just hope that by the end it all comes together well. I've sort of seen opinions in my own comment sections shifting, where initially everyone was praising the series, now I'm seeing more and more people getting upset with it or questioning it. But I am curious to hear what your thoughts were for this episode. Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Do you agree or disagree with anything I said here? Let me know in the comments below. And with that said, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.